Hello, welcome back to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and yours virtually.
We're coming to you from gardenatoz.org. I'm Dana Makanovich.
I'm Stephen Nicola.
And this is the portion of our webinar today where we're going to talk about fall bulbs. That's me.
Us.
And our daughter Sonia Nicola is
And
running the chat and the technical details of the webinar. You can put your questions into chat. She is not only an excellent gardener and might be able to start the answer for you, as can many of the people who attend the webinars, and you'll get a lot of input that way, but she'll line up the questions for us for a question session. And she's also technically very good, being a professor at a university, with handling Zoom and this kind of interaction between people. We've been writing for nearly 40 years about gardens because we've been gardening professionally for about 40 years and been amazed at how much we learn by sharing what we learn.
Yep.
So we have a website where we put all our articles, and we keep putting new articles where we show people, as in Steve's photographs and my words most of the time, what's going on. Normally in a webinar, we have a note-taking guide, and we have many note-taking guides for the topics we're covering today, but they are associated with earlier webinars. We'll tell you as we go along which webinar. If you go to our audience materials page, you can download, whether you're a subscriber or not, you can download any of the materials that are note-taking guides.
And there's some note-taking guides there that aren't from webinars or from some of our talks that we have done in the past.
Haven't made as a webinar yet. There's a lot of information there that you can download. When it comes to bulbs, the question is, can we have it all? Can we have healthy, husky, wide selection, bargain price, locally available bulbs? Steve and I went taking a look around. We most often order our bulbs. I can't say most often. Our first choice is to order our bulbs, and our two first choices are generally Brent and Becky's or McLaren Zimmerman. We've been ordering from Brent and Becky's for 30 some years. They are both second generation growers and now got third generation growers working with them, and they are very knowledgeable people, and it's a great catalog. McLaren Zimmerman, we first went to because we were looking for people who were, supporting the effort to not allow people to dig wild bulbs from the wild and sell them.
And that was happening.
And they have lots of unusual bulbs. McLaren Zimmerman does. They're in Wisconsin. Brent and Becky's is in Maryland?
Virginia.
Virginia. So before we get started, for plants that, for helping other people find where to get plants, have you purchased bulbs by mail? Can we just have a yes or no on a poll here?
There it is.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, so looks like we're pretty evenly split there. Yes, they were pleased, 48%. No, they've never ordered, 43%. And 1 out of 10 of us about have had some problems. I probably should have asked, would you order again? But we didn't ask that. Now we'll ask you to type into the chat what your recommended sources are, and if you would, put in only your positive sources. We don't need to hear which ones there were problems with. What we need to hear are the ones that worked out really well. That's what we all want to know. Interesting choices here. And interesting in the chat there that you're saying that you go to Costco because it's impulse buys. Don't they know that they get us on that? And yes, Cheapers Van Engelen is a single place. Van Morgundian, nice place. Good, great. So there is always that option of go out and see who has bulbs for sale. And the big box stores, this is a department grocery store, has bulbs there. These bulbs are coming for the most part from the same places that other bulb orders are coming from. One beef that we have with these is that they're held inside most of the time, and inside is where bulbs are going to dry out more rapidly. So as soon as they come in, buy them, which is an interesting thing this year, because normally by the middle of September, I start having trouble finding bulbs locally if I need them locally because they've all sold out. And this year they're only just showing up.
Some couple places we stopped didn't even have their bulbs
in yet, and that's unusual.
That's unusual. Yeah.
Now, a lot of people would say just look for price, and yes, price is going to make a difference. A bargain is a good deal. $30 for 40 daffodils. $30 for 40 daffodils. Let me see. That's close to 75 cents a daffodil. I like to look for 50-cent daffodils because they are out there. I sometimes pay $1 for a daffodil, but I don't like to do that. But rather than looking at money first, I try to look at the quality of the bulb that you're getting. Look at the size of the bulb that you're getting. Look at whether the bulbs are firm. Is it, if it was an onion or a garlic, would you buy it? Or is it dried out? Because they can dry out pretty quickly. You know, you look then and then you can figure out how much they cost.
Yeah.
So allium bulbs, people say, oh, you know, this is a small bulb. You got to compare apples and apples. A giant allium bulb is going to be a bigger bulb than
It's going to be huge.
But if you have two sources and you have two different sources selling giant allium, and one has the bigger bulb, and the price is a little higher for the bigger bulb, it's worth it. You're going to get a lustier plant, and sometimes you get a couple of blooms.
Especially if, not especially, but some of them also are divisions.
Yeah, almost all the time the alliums are divisions.
The alliums, you can see this one is cut, but
It's
it's
just
a bigger division than both of those.
Yep. And you can't compare the various alliums. There are alliums from 6 inches tall and a foot wide to 6 inches tall and an inch wide
dinky
to 4 feet tall. So you can't really compare the different alliums. If you buy mixes like that allium mix or this mix of daffodils, you're looking at 10 daffodils for 15 daffodils for $10, and you go, oh, how pretty, that's very nice, and $75 a bulb, but boy, look, I get little orange ones. It is highly unlikely in these mixtures that you're going to get that number of unusual daffodils. You're going to have mostly yellow daffodils with a couple of the others. It is just the way that it's done. And yet you could go and you could buy the individual daffodils that you like and pay, here we're paying 50 cents a bulb and getting the ones that you want to have. Mixes are almost never a good thing to do unless you're planting by the hundreds. And some of the naturalizing mixes, they're smaller bulbs, but you're planting.
It's better to make your own mix.
Make your own mix, yes. On something like an iris reticulata, these are they're called netted iris. They come up very early, usually for us the end of February. And they're just short guys when they bloom. It's highly unlikely that you're going to get Catherine Hodgkin's, the yellow one, which is just a spectacular iris. They're over $1 a bulb to buy them by themselves. It's unlikely that you're going to find that in there.
The photographer in me says that's why the yellow ones are all out of focus.
We didn't promise you yellow. I mean, the purple iris, the species iris reticulata, you can usually buy for 30 cents a bulb, 35 cents a bulb, but you're going to pay over $1 a bulb for each of the little tiny bulbs that gives you Catherine Hodgkin's.
Oh, yellow, yeah.
And do pay attention to the species, because Dutch iris is not the same as iris reticulata. Dutch iris is a hybrid of a much taller plant, the one that the florists use. I'm not as keen on using Dutch iris because they're taller and have kind of a messier appearance after they're done. I do have some in the garden.
Yeah, we have.
But we like the very, very early iris reticulata. We see this happening all the time locally. You're not getting a lot of information, but this is a ranunculus called decay anemone. And people fall for this all the time. It's such a gorgeous plant and comes in a lot of different colors. But I'm in zone 5, supposedly zone 6 now. This is a zone 6 plant. Rarely does anybody get this to bloom in zone 5 or even in zone 6, unless you've got a really long spring. This is a great Carolina bulb where there's lots of time in the spring. So you want to research these unusual bulbs that you haven't seen before, but we all want the unusual ones. We all want something that we don't have before, and snowdrops are really a wonderful plant. So we're always looking around and go, oh, what's that over there in that basket? It's a wild species tulip mix. And I like the little species tulips. I had an argument with one of my neighbors who kept asking me what that plant was in the yard, pointing to our tartar tulips when they bloomed before the crocuses in the spring. And he would point and say, what is that? I said, it's a tulip. And he would say, no, that's not a tulip. This went on for years until I find, and these tulips spread by themselves. And I looked, I went, deer resistant. I never thought about that. I just lumped all the tulips together as deer fodder.
Deer fodder,
but it turns out that a lot of people have said that these are deer resistant. But I did question the zone hardiness on this. I went 2 to 10, give me a break. Hardy in zone 2 to 10, there are very few plants that know that, and tulips need a cold period. you learn something and you can research something when I look
Now,
at.
how long have we been planting some of these tulips?
Right.
For 30 years?
Yeah. And I never
we
realized.
just find out now.
We just found out that the Saxatilis is probably the pink one in that mix. And it's zone 5 to 10, and it requires no cold period, unlike the other tulips that can't be grown in the south because they won't bloom well. And when you start reading about the other species tulips, you go, I'll be darned, zone 4 to 10 blooms without cold. Zone
No cold
2
period.
to 8, no cold period required. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have that. So what unusual bulbs do you like? Up to you. This is another mix, the anemone blandus. You're almost always going to end up with all of the light blue purple color.
Yeah.
They are the dominant color and they squeeze the white ones right out. Hyacinths are almost always going to cost $1 a bulb or more. It takes a long time to get them to be so heavy that they have to be staked up. I like them better after they've been 4 or 5 years in the garden and the flowers out, become more natural looking. The one nice thing about the mix in hyacinths is that the darker colors, the reds and the purples, are darker bulbs. So you can actually look and see if you're getting a mix, unlike the other bulbs. So let's just do a vote, quick vote here. We've got one last poll. What do you think is the most beautiful, most useful? Where do you get the most beauty, the most usefulness out of the 4 that are there?
I was to say, and surely your favorite isn't on there, but that's okay. Out of the 4 on offer, which one do you?
All right, you're going to put your favorite into the chat, and other people are going to say, I've never heard of that one. So it's daffodil wins out in this particular group that we set up. And as some people typed into chat, the tulip, they love the tulips, but they have the deer problems. It was interesting to see that allium, that daffodil was a runaway for a while, and then allium just started charging up.
Daffs are just so happy that time of year.
They are, and the fact that the deer don't eat them makes them, because tulips come in more colors, but it doesn't matter if there's more colors of tulips if they're all eaten. And now, while you've got a minute, you can put in the chat what your favorite bulb is of all these other types, like the Iris reticulata. We'll tell you what ours is. And here's what we get. Macy is wonderful. You can see there's see 1, 2, 3. It's like everything except the Mascari latifolium, the broadleaf grape hyacinth, are in our bulbs presentations. Mascari latifolium, the broadleaf grape hyacinth, is a cute thing. It's dark colored, very dark colored until it opens blue and has kind of little fluff at the top. It's a pretty different little Mascari grape hyacinth. And we've always loved the tarda tulip, little yellow tulip. That's the one that my neighbor always told me couldn't possibly be a tulip, and he insisted it must be a crocus. Thank you for that. People will like those suggestions. This is our favorite other bulb that people don't know about. It's very hard to get a picture of this because of the time of the year it blooms. It blooms the end of June, the beginning of July. It's called California hyacinth. It stands about 12 inches tall in bloom.
And it's blue.
By the time it's more blue. Steve says that he has tried for years to show how much bluer this is. It's not true blue, but it's much bluer than purple.
More blue than purple.
By the time it's blooming each year, the leaves are about done. You can actually clip them away. So it can come up here. We've got it coming up through sedum and juniper in our own gardens where we like to grow it. And where my bulb order is for this year is in the cranberry. This is the cranberry meridema, sea kale. We showed it to you earlier this year. This is just cut back after having bloomed. So it bloomed and we cut it back and the new leaves are coming out. There's room around it for bulbs to be blooming because right now, it has filled that whole area back up with leaves.
Yeah.
And so it's a very good platform to show off that blue purple color on top of those blue leaves. And it follows the bloom period. So place bulbs so that they look natural. And then they play well with others. You can't have bulbs that muscle people out of the way. Our weekend walkabout number 28 was choosing, using, and growing bulbs. And we showed you bulbs planted in the not natural way for show. I mean, it puts on a heck of a show when you plant that many bulbs. And in something like Brett and Becky's bulbs, you can actually get a per square foot bulb idea to do these kinds of plantings. But not most of us, and in this case, this client of ours has no problem putting them in and taking them out every year, taking them out and giving them away, and getting new ones and putting them in, because that's, You know, when people they don't play golf and they don't drink and they don't smoke, they have to spend their money on something, right?
And in that particular garden back there, he likes his show so much.
Yeah,
and the bulbs wouldn't survive that long. It's too dense shade.
Yeah. But here, if you're expecting the bulbs to stick around for a while, planting them in groups of 3 like this ends up looking more natural and just as full as that. And they grow if they're hardy bulbs. Granted, Ginger planted 100,000 bulbs in her woods over a period of years to get this to happen. But each of those bulbs has grown and filled in. It wasn't so full to begin with. This is a white narcissus and grape hyacinth. And if you look in our weekend walkabout number 16, it's called Continuous Color. There's a section on doubling up, planting things that cover up for bulbs.
So you're not cutting down the bulb foliage.
That's right, because we have time for other things rather than cutting down bulb foliage. For instance, peonies, there they are in the spring, not taking up very much room. That's sawdust we're using as mulch. Peony is going to be fully filling that whole space in summer. So who cares whether there's some tulip foliage between them and around them in the springtime?
Yep.
Japanese anemone foliage just coming up through the ground because it doesn't come till late, can cover the tulips and the lilies. That is that Japanese anemone later in the year. Shrubs that are not leaving out until later, like the oak leaf hydrangea, fair game for me to put naturalizing bulbs that I can put a few in and they'll spread themselves around. That one is English bluebells. Spireas that we are going to cut back anyway. We cut them all really back to nothing every 2 years. There's room then around the base for there to be bulbs there, because these Shelley's spirea cut all the way back are going to touch each other by the time they come up, so they can hide all kinds of iris reticulata and hyacinth in there. Japanese painted fern there in the front circled is nothing but Virginia bluebells early in the year. Virginia bluebells are not technically a bulb, but they're another ephemeral. They come up, they go away. And as they are blooming and before they go away, there's the Japanese painted fern coming up, and they cover the area over. You can either clip the foliage that shows of the bluebells away, or you can just let it senesce and let
it go.
That's called doubling up, and that's in Continuous Color webinar. When you place them out there with other plants, then put them in clumps rather than in rows or blocks or whatever. Put a clump here and a clump there and let them fill in. This is 3 bulbs planted together with 3 more bulbs planted together. We're doing that with a species tulip, a variegated foliage species tulip. It's uniflora, Tulipa uniflora. And we put 2 bulbs together here and 2 bulbs there. And
sometimes 3, sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
When Sonia was a little girl, I had read that the best way to naturalize bulbs and make them look like they just occurred on their own was to give them to a child and let them throw them around. I would warn you, if you do that, to put a little radio transmitter on every bulb, because you're never going to find
You'll be out weeding the garden and, oh, that's where that bulb went.
Yeah. This is Camassia or Indian Quamash. All around it is the foliage of Japanese anemone coming up. It's going to hide those clumps. There's 1 clump there, and you can see the foliage of the next clump, and in the background, another one there. Do them more naturally. Plumbago, a ground cover, comes up late in the spring and covers all of these squill and daffodils planted in clumps. And in our old garden, the general chaos of geraniums and lupin covered these tulips. These are tulips, by the way, they're in the Emperor series that I dug out 3 times and finally gave up trying to dig out. I thought every year
they just kept coming back.
I would leave little bits of bulb in the ground, and they are vigorous and hardy enough.
And we didn't have deer at that time.
Right, that they would eventually become a good-sized bulb again and come up blooming, and I finally gave up and said, you can stay. Now, there's a placement dilemma with bulbs. The bulb cover-ups block bulb planting. There's that anemone that hides the tulips and the lilies.
And what time is it?
It's bulb planting time.
And how do you plant bulbs in there?
What we do is we either hold those bulbs and wait until later, or we tie up the plants that we're planting, tie up their skirts so we can get under them, and we plant them at the base of the plant. So even things like coral bells, we can tie the leaves up out of the way, or even flip the leaves out. This is Brody eye, the California hyacinth, blooming with yellow Tiarella hybrids. They're foam flower heuchera hybrids. This is one I would want to plant around the cranberry, but instead I'm going to have to push leaves and stake them up out of the way and then plant close to the crown. And we plant deep. Deep is better for most of the bulbs because they need to rest during the growing season, rest below the watered irrigated area. So we're planting with a shovel, not with a trowel. That's how deep those daffodil bulbs are going in, and that's not too deep. I like them to be below breaking point.
They should actually be below that, because if you're digging in the garden, you'd rather miss the bulb.
Right, I'd rather not dig up my bulbs by accident.
And we even put little crocus in those.
Oh yes, even
We'll put them deep too.
yeah. This is a fall crocus or colchicum. Their leaves come up in the spring and go away, and now the flowers come up by themselves. So they really need a companion. And ideally, you start it, as we did it here, with the plumbago at the same time, just going in new, and you don't have to worry about things getting in the way. But you can always cut the plant back or tie it up tight as if you cut it back, and plant close to the spirea, remembering about the radial roots. The roots grow radially.
Don't cut in straight lines, go into cut.
See the peony, you want to plant by a peony. Look how the roots go radially out from the plant. Click me. There we go. So you want to cut radially. I thought we had any, or you want to take the plant that's going to cover the bulbs, like Japanese painted fern. Take one clump of Japanese painted fern out, divide it into 12 pieces. It'll easily divide that into pieces, and plant a bunch of little Japanese ferns and little bulbs to get started, because they do divide. I can see 2 divisions already on the outside edge, one here, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I've read in books that you should plant grape hyacinth. Every place you plant bulbs, plant some grape hyacinth, because their leaves come up in the fall. See the burned off leaves that are in there? Those are the leaves of the grape hyacinth that came up in the fall. And because our winters are more extreme than where they come from, but not extreme enough to kill them, those leaves have burned off. So the leaves come up in the fall, and they say that will tell you that you've got bulbs there. Well, unfortunately, grape hyacinths spread like by seed, like crazy. So I would rather plant pansies or calendula, something that can live over winter, a cool season perennial, to cover them up. And then we might, I would just, there it is. And remember, when you're working on that peony, it's the same as a tree. Don't cut across. Turn your spade and cut a V. You're likely to be between roots. Even if you do cut something, you're not going to cut as many roots cutting a V. So you can plant right close to that peony if you remember to cut a V when you plant.
If you cut across, you're going to cut 3 to 4. You cut a V, you might cut 1, maybe 2.
Yeah. I knew it was there somewhere. Okay, and that leaves us some time for some questions, which are probably going to include things like, everybody eats my bulbs. Right?
There's a little, it was more a discussion of, this would be my favorite if I didn't have bulls or deers or squirrels.
Yes.
So we have a question from Gretchen. Is it too early to plant bulbs now?
No, it is. No, the bulbs are
If they're in the stores, they're their time.
Yeah, if you dig up, as I do on a regular basis, dig up some of your own bulbs right now, you'll find that they have a lot of root already. They've already been growing. And some bulbs like colchicum, if you don't get them into the ground now, they'll sometimes just go into a dormancy for a whole year.
We did that with a client, and we're expecting 50 of them that were
at $10 a bulb.
All bulb.
Yeah.
And none of them, well, 2 of them came up, and we were like, oh man.
The next year, a year and a half after they were planted, there they all were. But and that's happened more than once. Another one that does that is winter aconite. It'll just sit dormant if you don't get it in the ground early enough. So the earlier the better. We plant bulbs till late at Michigan State at the demonstration gardens one year. Anne, I think it was Anne, was planting bulbs in January. You know, the ground was thawed, and one of the bulb companies had donated a whole bunch of bulbs, planted them in January. As long as there's enough time for their roots to grow before the top comes up, they bloom.
This one, I'm going out of order because this just came in, but Dave says plant bulbs in steel wool to prevent squirrel stealing. Had you heard of that? I had not heard of
Well,
that.
I've heard of something similar to that, and I tried it. To keep squirrels from digging them up and to keep mice from getting them, you can plant them in little wire mesh cages. Roots can get through.
Yeah.
I pierced all of my fingers multiple times working with hardware cloth to make a little basket for them and planted them. After I got them planted, I then realized I now have a metal basket in the ground. It's going to be murder to dig up when I needed to buy those bulbs or do anything here. And I've pierced my fingers a zillion times. So I think it could work, but I
I
don't.
think the steel wool would be better than that.
It's still going to be on the ground for a
But-
long. Maybe it'll
Yeah,
contribute
steel
some
wool
iron.
will rot a little faster. It's been.
Yeah.
And the chili powder or chili oil that I would use on my veggies over the winter, it's probably not going to have that same effect. And I'll always forget where I put the bulbs in come spring.
But in the spring is not when they get dug up so much. It's in the fall. Those squirrel brains, somebody's been digging here. They're going to go dig afterwards. When we plant bulbs in the fall, and a lot of bulbs in the garden, lay a piece of chicken wire across the top of where you planted so that they can't dig because there's chicken wire laying on the ground. And that prevents them from digging. And once the ground settles, they don't dig so much.
Yep.
In
Yep.
the spring.
They're looking for that new stuff. Yeah. So David had asked any thoughts on using bulbs as annuals instead of perennials, and you had addressed this a bit with the Boston garden and putting a bunch of bulbs in, taking a bunch of bulbs out. Are there any other concerns to think about? I mentioned my stupid gladiolus that you got to dig it out, or else you get blind shoots for the next 7 years coming up. But that's just my experience. I'm wondering if you have other advice or recommendations about the using bulbs as annuals.
That there are problems with using bulbs as annuals in that. Your gladioli issue is a good one, and they do that regularly for lots and lots of people. If you have a bulb that is might be a little bit hardy, sometimes the young bulblets grow and you do end up with a weed problem in the garden. But more than that, when you use bulbs as annuals over years and you keep pulling them out, you're going to end up losing soil in the garden, it erodes in the garden. And if you put in one batch of bulbs that had a problem, Windsor and the city parks where they plant thousands and tens of thousands of bulbs every year, they planted some bulbs that turned out to have lily bulb rot virus, and for years they couldn't plant anything in that area. So it's kind of like planting the same vegetable over and over again. You can end up with that
Just
problem.
be careful.
But if you're if you get good plants and you keep everything clean and you pay attention to how your soil is doing, you can keep doing it for a long time.
Great. Susan says she's been gathering the little black bulbs that come on the stems of tiger lilies. Please tell me when and how to plant them.
Anytime you can just drop those on the ground and they plant. The birds carry them around and they will grow themselves. You can just collect them and put them onto a flat with some moist potting mix and watch for them to root, and then set them where you want them to go in the garden. You can release them to the wild very quickly. There are a lot of people who would call you crazy because they are trying to get rid of the tiger lilies because they've become weeds in their garden. If you've got a lot of area to cover, though, it's a gorgeous weed. It's a gorgeous spreading plant.
I have a quick question that I think I already answered, but just to get your take on it as well. Marilyn says, how do you water a bed that has tulip bulbs and you plant something over them for the rest of the season? I replied that you guys don't water beds. You hand water new plants and transplants. But for someone who is watering their beds, is there any special watering care to take there?
Yeah, like clients of ours, many of our clients irrigated on a regular basis. When you plant deep, that takes care of it. It's one of the reasons we started planting deep. If we plant deep and there are other plants on top, the other plants have first dibs kind of on the water that's there, and your bulbs will get to rest as they are meant to rest in a dry season that they're escaping from. Most bulbs are escaping from the dry season. So if you plant them deep, we didn't have that problem with anything in the gardens, even when they're irrigated.
Great. And Kim is wondering, how long does it take before you can divide colchicum?
If they're in good growing conditions, you can divide them after a year. Let's see, when did I put colchicum into the grandkids' garden? See, I brought those divisions from, so probably 4 years ago, I put colchicum into the grandkids' garden. And last year, and the next year, I dug 2 out for our garden.
Mhm.
And last year I dug one up and divided it in to get a third one for us and gave one to the neighbor. So if they're in good growing conditions, you should be able to divide them up even after a year.
Great. Well, that is the end of the questions that I have logged. No, that is not true. I was so excited because it's 10 a.m. and I thought we would end right on time. There's one left from Michelle. I'm thinking my Henry Sweet Spire that are just purchased, but in a big pot would be a good candidate for splitting into 2 bushes before
Yes.
potting.
Oh, yes, because Itea, Little Henry, Virginia Sweet Spire is a suckering shrub. So it will have, you could probably take one pot of Little Henry and make 8 new shrubs,
Mhm.
not just from the stems, but from the runners that are wrapped around the inside of the pot. So yeah, go for it.
Great. Then yeah, we are. I think that clears us out unless anyone had a question they wanted to use a mic.
What zone is are pansies good to?
Well,
Right.
yeah, pansies are hardy to zone 5, but they can sometimes get eaten. They can sometimes come up too early and freeze off. It's you put them in a slightly protected place and take the ones that make it.
Yep.
Well, that's it for bulb time and for this week. But stand back. There's a change in the schedule. We're going to New Zealand. That's going to be a garden or a field like we've never done before. We don't know what we're going to discover, what we're going to do, but we're going to be broadcasting, webcasting from New Zealand, October 8th and 15th. But there'll be no webinar on October 1st because we're in transit then. And we've added a webinar in November. And that changes the schedule to mean that next week we're talking about fall moves that yield spring savings. We will open up the October 15th New Zealand webcast to the world. So let people know if they want to take a look at what we are seeing.
What kind of crazy things are we doing? Yeah.
And we'll send you weekly invitations.
Yep.
And so that's it for this week, but it is fall. It is the busy season. We're here weekly all the way through into the middle of November. So send your questions because that's what feeds the whole community, really. We all learn and move forward. We all grow together. Thanks for being with us.
And join us next week for fall moves that yield spring savings.
Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks especially to those who are joining us new or haven't joined us in a while today. It was really good to have you here and we hope to see you again.